There is a massive difference between running a highly successful business and controlling a $1 billion empire. The average person looks at a mega corporation and assumes they just got incredibly lucky with a fantastic product. They think that if they just work hard enough and build a good enough app or service, they'll eventually reach that exact same level. But that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how extreme wealth actually operates. A successful business makes money. A $1 billion empire makes the rules. They don't just participate in the global economy, they bend the economy to their will. They operate on a completely different set of physics, utilizing hidden mechanisms, infinite leverage, and strategic ruthlessness to ensure that they don't just win today, but they remain completely untouchable for the next century. Today, we are stripping away the corporate PR. We're going to show you the exact invisible architecture that turns a company into a global superpower, and why these empires are practically impossible to tear down once they reach the top. Welcome to Orionics, the place where future billionaires come to get inspired. Number 1. They own the invisible infrastructure. Amateurs try to sell the best product. Empires want to own the road that the product travels on. When a $1 billion empire scales, they stop focusing entirely on the consumer-facing item and start aggressively acquiring the foundational layers of their industry. Take a look at the biggest tech giants. They don't just build software anymore, they build the cloud servers that host everyone else's software. They own the data centers, the underwater internet cables, and the payment processing rails. By owning the underlying infrastructure, they guarantee that even if a competitor builds a superior product, that competitor still has to pay them a toll just to exist. They transition from being a player on the board to literally owning the board itself. Number 2. They engineer inescapable ecosystem. A regular company sells you a phone and then hopes you come back 3 years later to buy another one. A $1 billion empire sells you a phone, then sells you the smartwatch that only syncs with that phone, the cloud storage that holds all your family photos, and the software subscriptions that tie your entire digital life together. This is called the walled garden. They build an ecosystem where the deeper you go, the more painful and expensive it becomes to leave. The switching costs become so psychologically and financially high that leaving their brand feels like uprooting your entire life. They don't just want your money for a single transaction, they want to lock in your loyalty indefinitely. Number 3. They weaponize access to cheap capital. We've said it before, and it bears repeating. The rules of money completely change at the top. While small businesses have to beg banks for high-interest loans just to keep the lights on, billion-dollar empires have access to oceans of practically free money. Because they hold massive assets and show predictable cash flows, institutional lenders and bond markets give them billions at interest rates so low they barely beat inflation. They use this cheap debt to buy up competitors, build massive distribution centers, and fund relentless expansion. They are essentially using other people's money to solidify their monopolies, taking all the upside while outsourcing the financial risk to the market. Number 4. They buy the threat before it becomes a rival. Billion-dollar empires are deeply paranoid, and that paranoia is their greatest defense mechanism. They have entire teams of analysts whose only job is to scan the market for any tiny startup that could potentially disrupt their business model in 5 or 10 years. When they spot a threat, they don't try to outcompete it. They just open their massive wallets and buy it outright. If the startup refuses to sell, the empire will clone their best features and use their massive distribution network to crush them into oblivion. They use their vast capital to essentially purchase their own future survival, neutralizing risks before the general public even knows a war is happening. And understanding how these massive power plays work is almost impossible if you're only consuming traditional business advice. You need to see the board from the perspective of the people actually moving the pieces, and that is exactly why we built the Orionics app. We created a private ecosystem designed to give ambitious individuals the exact playbooks used by elite founders, CEOs, and investors. Inside the app, you get daily coaching sessions and full-length masterclasses from world-class experts who have actually built generational wealth and scaled massive enterprises. It's essentially a high-performance board of advisors right in your pocket. And because you are serious enough to be here with us today, if you download the Orionics app and scan the QR code on screen right now, you will lock in an exclusive 25% off your yearly membership. Invest in your own strategic mind, my friend. It is the one asset that compounds forever. I'll see you on the inside. All right, moving on. Number 5. They monopolize the top 1% of talent. An empire is only as strong as the minds operating it. Billion-dollar companies understand that holding on to the absolute best engineers, operators, and visionaries is a matter of life and death. But they don't just hire top talent to build great things. They hire them so their competitors can't have them. They offer astronomical salaries, massive stock options, and golden handcuffs that make it financially irresponsible for a genius-level employee to ever leave. Sometimes, they will acquire a struggling tech company for tens of millions of dollars just to absorb its engineering team, a strategy known as an acqui-hire. By hoarding the intellectual capital of an entire generation, they dictate the pace of innovation. Number 6, they leverage regulatory capture. This is the quiet, dirty secret of corporate dominance. When a company becomes a billion-dollar empire, they don't just abide by the laws. They help write them. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying, political donations, and think tanks. They push for complex regulations, intense compliance laws, and safety standards that sound fantastic to the public. But the real goal is to make the barrier to entry so ridiculously expensive that no small startup can ever afford to comply. They pull the ladder up behind them. By making the rules incredibly complex, they ensure that only those with massive legal and compliance departments, meaning themselves, can afford to play the game. Number 7. They operate on decadal timelines. Most normal businesses are trapped in a cycle of survival. They worry about making payroll next week or hitting their quarterly earnings targets to keep Wall Street happy. When you are constantly looking down at your feet, you cannot navigate the horizon. The most powerful empires on Earth are operating 10, 20, even 50 years in the future. They're willing to lose billions of dollars on an experimental division today because they know that specific technology will be the backbone of human society in a decade. They invest in artificial intelligence, biotech, and global logistics networks long before they are profitable. They have the luxury of patience, and patience at scale is practically unbeatable. Number 8. They shift from utility to identity. A commodity competes on features and price. An empire competes on human emotion and identity. The most powerful brands in the world do not sell you the physical components of their products. They sell you status, belonging, and an idealized version of yourself. When a company successfully intertwines its logo with the consumer's ego, price resistance completely vanishes. People will gladly pay a 500% premium for a laptop, a car, or a cup of coffee because of what that specific brand signals to the rest of the world. Empires cultivate this religious level of devotion, transforming their customer base from rational buyers into a fiercely loyal, defensive army. Number 9. They capture both sides of the transaction. Why settle for a slice of the pie when you can own the entire bakery? Billion-dollar empires are masters of vertical integration. They don't just want to sell you a product, they want to own the factory that made it, the shipping fleet that transported it, and the retail platform where you bought it. By capturing the entire supply chain, they completely eliminate middlemen and squeeze every single drop of profit margin out of the process. Furthermore, if a global supply chain crisis hits, they are completely insulated while their smaller competitors are starved out of existence. Total control of the pipeline is total control of the market. Number 10. They turn their data into a predictive weapon. In the modern era, the most valuable asset a company can hold isn't cash, and it isn't real estate. It is the behavioral data of billions of human beings. Empires track what you search, how long you hover over an image, what time you wake up, and what you buy when you are stressed. They take these trillions of data points and feed them into algorithmic models that don't just understand your behavior, but actually predict what you are going to do before you even know it yourself. They use this data to optimize their pricing, design their next products, and serve you advertisements at the exact psychological moment your willpower is at its lowest. They know you better than you know yourself. Number 11. They become structurally too big to fail. At the absolute peak of corporate power, an empire weaves itself so deeply into the fabric of daily human life that its collapse would mean the collapse of society itself. Think about the largest payment processors, the biggest search engines, or the most massive agricultural conglomerate. If they were to suddenly disappear tomorrow, global trade would freeze, communications would go dark, and supply chains would shatter. When a company becomes this systemically vital, they achieve a state of immortality. Governments have absolutely no choice but to protect them, bail them out, and ensure their survival, because the collateral damage of letting them die is simply too catastrophic to allow. Number 12. They embrace the power of asymmetric bets. Billion-dollar empires do not gamble, but they constantly make asymmetric bets. This means they allocate a fraction of their massive cash reserves into hundreds of wild, highly experimental projects. They know that 90% of these moonshots will completely fail, and they are perfectly fine with that. Because the math dictates that the 10% that actually succeed will return 1,000 times their initial investment and spawn entirely new trillion-dollar industries. They possess the capital to absorb massive failures without blinking, ensuring that whenever the next massive technological shift happens, they are already holding the winning lottery ticket. Number 13. They ruthlessly outsource their friction. An empire refuses to be bogged down by the messy, low-margin realities of the physical world. While they keep the high-profit, highly scalable intellectual property and branding tightly in-house, they outsource all the brutal, low-wage friction to third parties. They don't employ the factory workers. They use overseas contractors. They don't own the delivery vehicles. They use gig economy workers. By shifting the legal liabilities, the healthcare costs, and the labor disputes onto independent contractors and smaller logistics firms, they maintain incredibly pristine, highly profitable balance sheets. They keep the gold and outsource the dirt. Number 14. They insulate their wealth through legal labyrinths. When you look at a mega corporation, you are rarely looking at a single company. You are looking at a masterclass in legal and financial engineering. They use complex webs of holding companies, offshore subsidiaries, and intellectual property licensing agreements to move their capital across international borders. They generate their profits in high-tax countries, but magically report those earnings in zero-tax jurisdiction. They have armies of elite corporate lawyers and accountants who exploit the gray areas of international tax law, ensuring that while they generate billions in revenue, their actual tax burden is frequently lower than that of their own warehouse workers. Number 15. They operate with a sociopathic lack of emotion. To reach and maintain billion-dollar status, you cannot afford to be sentimental. Loyalty is a liability if it gets in the way of efficiency. If a highly profitable division suddenly becomes obsolete, it is liquidated overnight. If a beloved CEO can no longer scale the company, they are quietly replaced by the board. If thousands of jobs can be replaced by a new artificial intelligence system, the empire will make the switch without a second of hesitation. They view the business purely as a mathematical machine. The sole directive is the survival and expansion of the empire, and they will mercilessly cut away anything or anyone that threatens that trajectory. And since you have proven you have the focus and discipline to stay with us until the very end, Oryonyxer, here is your secret bonus. The ultimate power of an empire is selling you the illusion of choice. You walk into a supermarket and you see 50 different brands of soda, snacks, and household goods. You feel like a highly empowered consumer making independent choices. But the hidden reality is that almost all of those competing brands are quietly owned by the exact same massive conglomerate. They create the illusion of fierce competition to satisfy your psychological need for variety. But no matter which box you pull off the shelf, your money is flowing into the exact same billionaire's pocket. True power isn't forcing you to buy their product. True power is designing a game where no matter what move you make, they win. If you are ready to stop playing on their board and start building your own empire, write the word empire in the comments below. It will confuse the casual scrollers, but we will know exactly who the real builders are. Thanks for spending some time with us today, Oryonyxer. Keep building, keep growing, and we'll see you back here next time. Until then, take care.